For decades, we've basically operated on one assumption about global poverty,
Right.
that it's a solvable problem and that it just needs three things: better tech, more knowledge, and, well, huge amounts of money.
And today we have all three. I mean, in unprecedented abundance.
Exactly. And yet, prosperity is still so concentrated. We have nearly 4 billion people outside the global middle class. So the real question isn't about resources anymore. It's why. Why does poverty persist?
It's the central paradox of our time, isn't it? The fact that large-scale poverty still exists in an age of overwhelming capacity. It points to a simple but pretty radical diagnosis.
Which is?
The problem's an external. It's an internal structural design flaw in how our societies are, organized. The core thesis we're really getting into today is that this flaw comes from a fundamental denial of human agency, of free will.
That reminds me of the anecdote from the source material, the one about Calcutta in 1991. The realization that hits you is so profound. If you live under a bridge, what good is freedom? What is democracy? Freedom without a structure to support it. That's not liberation, it's just neglect.
It's neglect. Dignity needs the conditions for choice, not just the abstract right to choose.
And that reframes the entire problem.
It changes everything. Because if poverty is structural and internal, that means it can be redesigned. We can literally design it out of existence.
But but that only holds if we actually have free will.
Precisely. If our behavior is just fixed, by destiny or physical laws, then trying to change the structure is pointless.
So there's the tension. We're sort of taught to accept determinism, that things are preordained, but our own experience, even science, suggests that freedom, it grows with complexity.
It does.
So our mission for this deep dive is clear. Let's unpack how that fatalism paralyzes us, and then explore this universal law that seems to govern how freedom expands through structure.
Let's start with that trap, the fatalistic trap.
Okay, determinism.
Yeah, the belief that every action, every single outcome is already decided. That choice is just an illusion. And this idea is ancient. The source material uses the classic Greek myth of Oedipus as, the prime example.
Right, the king who gets a prophecy that he'll kill his father and marry his mother.
And the whole tragedy is that he spends his life actively running away from that fate.
And in doing so, he fulfills it. His attempts to escape are what actually make it happen. It's the perfect picture of fate, just closing in.
It is. And while that's a philosophical horror story, just imagine applying that thinking to, say, public policy.
If every outcome is fixed, why even bother to plan?
Exactly. We see that paralysis today. It shows up in a couple of ways.
How so?
Well, first, in personal accountability. You hear the defense, I had no choice, my brain made me do it, or my circumstances.
Right.
But more critically for this discussion, you see it in government. When policymakers try a few programs, they pour in some money, and things don't change. They conclude poverty is just destiny.
Yep.
You hear them say, well, we've tried everything.
And everything in that context usually just means more money, more tech, more information.
Yes.
It almost never means redesigning the actual organizational structure, the incentives, the feedback loops, the rules of the game that guide how people behave.
Precisely. And accepting that things are fixed has a catastrophic cost.
Which is the loss of responsibility.
A loss of responsibility.
Yeah.
If you believe your structures are unchangeable, your ability to improve them just dissolves. It's a society that stops designing for a better future. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's like that Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. But this belief in a fixed universe, it was really supercharged by classical science, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The high point of classical determinism was Laplace's thought experiment.
Remind us of that one.
He imagined this super intellect that knew the exact position and momentum of every single particle in the universe.
Okay.
For that intellect, the entire future could be predicted with absolute certainty. Freedom just vanishes. It's just a calculation waiting to happen.
But we can't stop there. Because even when quantum theory came along and introduced randomness, that's still not agency, is it?
Not at all. An electron behaving randomly isn't making a choice. It's just unpredictable. If the universe was only either pure determinism or pure randomness, how could you ever get something as complex and organized as, say, a living cell or a human society?
It seems impossible.
And that's the pivot. We have to look beyond just motion and energy. We have to look at structure itself.
Yeah.
Organization.
So if the cosmos were purely deterministic, it would just repeat itself forever. Cosmic boredom.
Total cosmic boredom.
Yeah.
Yet what we see is lawful sameness. All hydrogen atoms are alike, giving rise to this boundless, ever-increasing variety. That suggests order itself contains the seeds of evolving freedom.
The structure is the key, and the source material breaks down what that organizational layer looks like.
Right. Structure really emerges from three interacting elements. You have feedback, which is learning from past actions. You have constraint, which are the rules that narrow down the possibilities. And you have interaction, the way the parts adjust to each other. This is how a system starts to favor certain pathways over others.
And this whole framework leads to what the source calls the universal law of increasing complexity, ULIC.
Exactly. ULC basically says the universe evolves toward higher order, and that process enlarges a system's capacity for organized choice. Causality goes from being external, like A hits B, to internal. The structure itself starts to guide its own path forward.
So that completely reframes what we mean by freedom.
It does.
It's not about an absence of laws or rules. It's the ability to select from a range of lawful possibilities. Can you walk us through how that freedom expands as things get more complex?
Sure. Think of it as a hierarchy. At the very bottom, a subatomic particle exists as a spectrum of possibilities. It has no choice. Interaction selects its state.
Simple enough.
Move up a level to a complex molecule. It's constrained by chemical bonds, but it has more structural flexibility, different ways it can configure itself.
Okay, a little more room to maneuver.
But then you get to conscious beings, and freedom takes a huge leap forward.
Because we don't just react to the present, we anticipate the future.
Precisely. We extend our freedom by simulating multiple futures. If I do A, then X might happen. If I do B, Y happens. And we do that before we choose. We internalize cause and effect, and societies, well, they amplify that ability, aligning many minds to guide their collective future.
So freedom actually grows because of the complexity of the structure. It needs those boundaries to exist. Without them, it's just noise.
It's just randomness. Freedom is the most refined expression of organization. There's a wonderful Jewish parable from Avat that sums it up perfectly. Everything is expected, yet permission is given.
I like that. Determinism provides the structure, the boundary conditions, but agency defines the path you take inside it.
That's it.
So let's bring this back down to earth, to societies. When a society denies this internal causality, when it rejects the idea that its people can anticipate and choose, what happens? What does that look like?
The outcome is what the source calls the poverty of direction.
A poverty of direction.
Yes. It's a state of, well, structural loss of hope, resignation, paralysis. The source brings up this tragic example of smallholder farmers in Africa. When they were asked to talk about their dreams, they couldn't name a single one.
And that silence wasn't because they lacked imagination.
No, not at all. It was resignation. It came from being in a system that had structurally failed to reward their effort, a system that didn't allow for any meaningful path forward.
So they're busy, they're working hard, but all that motion has no progress. The structure itself is a dead end.
Correct. And you can diagnose that structural paralysis by looking for a breakdown in the triad that sustains any living system, including an economy.
The triad for self-guidance. Okay, let's break that down. Feedback, anticipation, and coherence.
Let's start with feedback. That's the system's ability to learn from its actions. In an economy, that means things like functioning markets, transparent prices, real elections.
And if that feedback gets distorted, say, by corruption,
then the system can't correct its course. It just keeps making the same mistakes over and over.
Okay, number 2 is anticipation.
Anticipation is all about preparing for the future. For a cell, it might be a defense against a virus. For an economy, it's long-term investment, education, planning. If you don't have anticipation, you're always just reacting.
You're constantly putting out fires instead of building something.
Exactly. You see systems that build houses, but forget about the water infrastructure. They rely on emergency aid, but never plan for self-sufficiency. There's no vision of the future pulling the present forward.
And the third piece, coherence, holds it all together.
Coherence is internal stability. It's alignment. At its core, it's trust. Trust that the rules of the game are fair and won't just change tomorrow.
So if coherence fails, if contracts aren't enforced,
Then feedback becomes meaningless and anticipation becomes impossible. People just hoard what they have or they check out of the system entirely. If any one leg of that triad weakens, the whole system just stagnates. It loses its ability to guide itself.
So there's this fundamental tension then. How do you design a structure that provides coherence and stability, but also maximizes individual freedom and choice?
And societies have struggled with that balance throughout history. You had structures like feudalism or the Soviet Kolkhoz. They provided extreme stability.
But by crushing individual choice.
Right. So energy and innovation just died. Then you have the other extreme, pure anarchy, which has maximum choice but zero coherence. nothing sustainable can be built.
The analysis points to one structural innovation that it says changed the world, the limited liability company. Which, seems like a pretty small detail in this huge discussion.
It seems small, but structurally, it was revolutionary. The LLC was the first time we formalized structured freedom in the economy. It allowed for individual initiative, that's the freedom part, but within an organized framework that pooled risk and defined responsibility.
So before the LLC, a failed business could ruin your entire family for generations.
It could. The LLC created coherence and anticipation by limiting risk, and that unleashed this massive wave of entrepreneurial feedback. It let complexity expand without the system constantly collapsing.
That's a fascinating way to think about something we just take for granted. But the source suggests the kibbutz model is an even more advanced application.
It is, because the kibbutz took that idea of structured freedom and extended it beyond just work and profit. It was designed to maintain individual difference and fulfillment,
Within a completely unified social framework.
covering all aspects of life. There's a great quote from Muki Sur, a kibbutz historian. He said, "The kibbutz is not a place where people live together, but a place where each person is fulfilled only through the other."
So they essentially built trust as their core architecture. That allowed for individual freedom while maintaining this deep sense of belonging.
Exactly. It's a really successful example of structured freedom. It captures the spirit of something like the African philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because we are.
Yeah.
Ubuntu has that moral insight, which is essential for coherence. But often it lacks the formal structures, the designed feedback loops, the rigorous planning for anticipation, that the kibbutz engineered to turn that moral insight into sustainable prosperity. The design is what makes the difference.
So this really changes the definition of poverty. It's not just a lack of stuff. It's the absence of this structural freedom. It's the loss of that sustaining triad.
Fundamentally, yes. To transform reality, you need more than charity or good intentions. You need structural design. We have to rebuild our systems, social, economic, all of them, so they can hold that tension, learn from failure, and choose new, coherent paths forward.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to agency. The paradox of abundance and poverty. The answer isn't just giving people things.
No.
It's about giving people structures that recognize and unleash their capacity to choose, to design, to build.
And that's really the final thought for you to take away. Denying free will. It breaks our connection to that universal flow of increasing complexity. To honor free will is to recognize that the same universal law that shaped the stars also calls on you to help shape society's future. Determinism defines the boundaries, the direction of travel. But freedom defines the path we choose to take.